I would say to start, especially because I feel like this might be like a young professional or student, I'd say it's really good to get involved in like student clubs or even industry clubs. For geology, the big ones are like CSPG, CSEG, but for geothermal, it's like Think Geo Energy or the Geothermal Resources Council. I believe it's what it's called. And so I would get started in those, and then slowly I'd try to find people just through LinkedIn that work in geothermal, maybe ask them for a coffee. Definitely don't ask them for a job, but just reach out to them and say like, hey, I'm really interested in learning more about geothermal. Like, do you mind if I buy you a coffee? It'll be like 15 minutes. And most of the time I find, because I've done this before, like I find that most of the time people are really nice and they'll say yes. So yeah, I think that would be a good start. And then, yeah, just like Google and try and figure out, okay, if I'm looking to get a job in geothermal, how do I like most prepare myself for that? And so if I go for coffee with someone in geothermal, I want to have like a knowledge base already to be able to carry on conversation with them. So then when they go back to work and they're like, oh crap, like I'm looking for a summer student or something. I went for coffee with this guy, Cole, and he seemed to like know what's up. So he seemed like a really, chill guy. Maybe we can see if we can hire him. And so I think that would be a really good start. That's a long-winded answer, but yeah, so that's a really good one. There's a couple things to consider. One of them is that, especially with traditional geothermal in the past, there's been instances in Hawaii, especially, where you're able to drill down into the geothermal resource. So it's really hot, which is great. But since it's a volcano, there's a lot of volcanic gases, H2S, that would be able to come up as you're producing the fluid. And so in the past, when it was first being developed, there's not sufficient pollution abatement technologies. Like they were sort of just gassing or like setting out like H2S emissions while they're producing. And so that obviously got local community members sick. And so I'm saying this as like worst case scenario sort of thing. Newer technologies like stop this from happening nowadays, like especially more recently. But in Hawaii, because of their sort of, I guess, like looking past like these things that cost more money to be like a more environmentally friendly, they've really upset a lot of the local people there. And so, yeah, to kind of summarize, like there can be greenhouse gas emissions if you're not dealing with the fluids correctly when you bring them up to surface. You can also have potentially water contamination if you're not disposing them correctly. Nowadays, again, if you have surface casing that's legitimate or fine, like that's going to stop all water contamination, and it's kind of like a closed loop system, so it doesn't matter. As far as like land surface footprint, like I was sort of hinting at, compared to these other technologies, geothermal is really small. So if you think of hydro being something that has maybe a large surface footprint, if you're in a place that doesn't have really big relief. So some place like the Grand Canyon, for example, you can hold a lot of water in the canyon and it doesn't play a huge part environmentally on the local surrounding area. But if you look at like Quebec or even some places in Africa, to be able to get sufficient volume of fluid in hydro, you'll have to use a really large surface area. And so that'll displace entire villages and stuff downstream or upstream if you're making a reservoir before putting the water through the dam. I don't know if that answered your question. There's a couple tangents there again, but
no, that answered it. It kind of gave me a quick little follow up. You mentioned the worst case scenario, and like when a lot of misconceptions around, say, fracking is that it causes earthquakes. Is there a misconception around geothermal that you guys are going to trigger a volcano eruption?
So if you talk to local community members in Hawaii, they would say yes, but like scientifically, no. Like I said, there's wells that have drilled into magma in the subsurface, and it's not it's a big deal, but it's not like environmentally like the magma is going to like shoot up at like a little mini volcano sort of thing. Likewise, like worst case scenario for fracking or stimulating the reservoir is you induce a seismic event. And so similar to oil and gas, geothermal systems have basically traffic light systems. So if you induce a little event that might be like, okay, stop injecting, stop producing for a little bit. If you induce a huge event, they might say red light, stop in that area. You're going to induce events which could cause damage to local like housing or residential areas. And so that's something that's, prevalent right now. And I'm sure you guys know in like Alberta, Oklahoma, Texas with induced seismicity. Some of the largest induced seismicity events for geothermal actually happened in Pohang, South Korea, and St. Gallen in Basel, Switzerland. And so those events were high enough in magnitude that some buildings at surface got damaged and kind of left a sour perception of geothermal. But in theory, if you practice proper due diligence, same with oil and gas, and you say, okay, the system is not supposed to be pressurized, it's not supposed to be, dangerous, you shouldn't in theory have problems with induced seismicity. But yeah. That's a good question. Yeah, so I started out at just in geology, and then I sort of saw, okay, I could get 2 degrees with an extra year. So then I did geophysics, and so then I was like, okay, do I do geology or do I do geophysics? And then in the theory of being, a generalist, I did both, and then added this sort of data science aspect where I do a lot of coding, especially with COVID. I learned a lot of coding in Python and data analysis. And then career-wise, I was like, okay, I could go into tech, I could go into oil and gas, or I could go into this renewable energy, sort of like clean energy space. And there is sort of 5 different companies that I sort of targeted in terms of developing or professionally developing my skill set. And so those companies were like Eavor, this other company called Ideon. There's also Proton Technologies, which does hydrogen. And then there is E3 Metals for lithium, H2 Nano or Summit Nanotech, which is also lithium. And so I went out and met all these professionals who work in those industries and then built up a knowledge base. So then basically I set myself up, and I'm biased that this is the right way to do it because it worked for me, but basically I set myself up for that. If there's ever an opportunity in oil and gas, if there's ever an opportunity in environmental geoscience, if there's ever an opportunity in tech, in the tech space in Calgary, which is growing rapidly, or if there's ever an opportunity in hydrogen, helium, lithium, geothermal, that I would be ready to go to it if it seemed like a good opportunity. And so then it kind of came down to, okay, like I'm getting offers from these different companies, including oil and gas. Maybe I want to try something different. And so Suncor, I was actually in a permanent placement program to work there full time, but then shortly after they just laid off like 5 or 10% of the workforce. So it didn't work out. So I could have gone back there and tried to still like finesse in and keep on like trucking or try something new. And so the decision I came to is I'd rather, work on something that's super cool and innovative, sort of front line of innovation. And so that's why I chose to work at Eavor. Efficiency is kind of a hard one to answer, but like cost wise, for relative cost, if you're able to produce supercritical fluids, say by drilling into next to a heat source such as a volcano, which they're doing in Newberry in the States, or if you're drilling super deep to get that heat as well, and be able to produce that, I'd say that the energy density that you would have from those super hot geothermal systems would be like drastically like crazy big. And so you could have like one well producing supercritical, or one loop or whatever system that you're using, one well producing those fluids, and that would be like a very large volume of energy output. So compared to like, an oil and gas well, or even oil and gas like pad of wells, that might be like more compelling of a solution if you're trying to just look at energy production. And then as well as electricity, you could do some sort of heating as well with the residual heat or like byproduct heat from the operation. But in terms of efficiency, I think that's kind of hard to hard to answer. See, and I was kind of hinting at my last slide too, that there's such a big urgency for so many countries to get away from hydrocarbons or fossil fuels. And so like I said, I am an oil and gas person at heart, and I really like oil and gas. I think it's going to be here for a long time, but like in the spirit of like slowly and, I would say practically moving away from it. So to make another point, I don't think it's right to just be like, okay, we have to stop oil and gas right now. It doesn't make practical sense. It's going to be way too much money, and there's too many things that are dependent upon it. But in the spirit of slowly getting away to more clean energy sources over like decades, I think there's going to be a lot of money that's pumped into geothermal right now and these new technologies. And so geothermal, rather than just at volcanoes and specific types of rocks, is going to be able to be put anywhere in the world. So it could be a cold place like, Alberta, where the geothermal gradient's like 30 or something. So to get electricity, you need around 150. So that means you just have to drill, what's 3 times like 5 kilometers or something, 30 times 5 depth wise. And so, what wells around the world have drilled to, 12 kilometers in Russia, which is the deepest well in the world, or 9 kilometers in Germany, which is called KTB. And so there's so many examples around the world that can be drawn from in terms of technical feasibility. It's just getting that cost curve down requires investment right now, I think. And so in a couple decades or whatever long term, I think geothermal is going to go from this small sliver of the pie of the energy mix to something that's way larger, and not just because of electricity, but because of like district heating, especially in Europe, for decarbonizing. I think what and so I'll make 2 points here. I think that's like a correct statement. Hydro is really good in super specific locations. Even Quebec has a lot of hydro. Ontario has a lot of hydro. Iceland has a combo of hydro and geothermal, which works really well for them. And so there's actually a lot of tech companies or companies that are moving their operations to Iceland to be able to say that they're run on 100% renewable energy or clean energy. And so another incentive for having geothermal might be that, okay, and there's a lot of companies, Silicon Valley companies, that are kind of like super holy and want to be known to be 100% run on clean energy. And so that might actually draw investment into your country if you're investing in geothermal and working on it. Like Germany, Netherlands, those countries are just on the upswing of it. And so I think, yeah, geothermal right now might be limited to these certain really specific or niche locations, but then going forward, because of this new technology, is going to be able to put it anywhere. Because with hydro, I'm not sure, unless you manufacture those like hydro storage sites where you pump water up the side of a mountain into like a reservoir, and then whenever you need electricity, pump it down the side of the mountain to sort of use it again, like that potential energy. I just can't see, and I could be wrong, I just don't see hydro being able to, scale beyond what it is, which is just that like rivers and flowing water. There's sort of, again, two different like ideas to think of here. One is that, traditional geothermal, if you produce hot water or hot fluids out of the ground too quickly and inject cold fluids down, you start to see a decline on your thermal resource. So the ground will effectively get colder where you're producing from. And so that means that you have to either drill a well in somewhere adjacent that's still hot and far enough away that you still have that heat, or something that's being looked at now in some of these older geothermal fields is that, okay, if these new technologies aren't reliant on, the geology, they don't need fractures or whatever to be successful. Why don't we just use those in a place that's hot and has a bunch of data, all the regulatory permitting's all in place in our current field, and just go like deeper, again, to try and target those super hot fluids. And so that's something that is being worked on on a lot right now. Yeah, traditional geothermal, and then yeah, advanced geothermal I kind of talked to you a bit too there. It makes a lot of sense in the Western United States, where basically energy prices for electricity are higher, or a place like Japan, or any island, basically, or some place where electricity prices are high. It makes sense to do, like super large operations, looking at decarbonizing like different industrial sectors, and electricity wise, like eating into that part of the pie away from, fossil fuels or whatever. But in places like Europe, where, they might have not, or in certain countries in Europe, or even Canada, for example, where we have really lower electricity prices in certain regions, then it doesn't make sense, I'm pretty sure, economically, to try and fight against those electricity prices when oil and gas can clearly like be cheaper. So then it comes down to certain use cases of that, like, okay, can we use geothermal heat rather than electricity for like vertical farming or greenhouses and that sort of deal, like direct use. So more like residential usages and district heating would be super big, where electricity not necessarily is the best option. And so, yeah, I'd say for like electricity generation, that would be more like industrial application. But then in areas where electricity prices are not that high, or economically it doesn't make sense, there's use cases for like district heating, especially in Europe, in a lot of those countries, Poland, Netherlands, Germany. Especially with the newer technologies, you can scale the project to meet like the energy demand. And so if you might, there might be a particular scenario, for example, on an island, where you build a project to power the entire island with electricity, but then maybe you scale it so then your energy output is actually more than the demand the island has, and then create a secondary like spin-off industry of like green hydrogen that you then export and create money for your local island. Case by case, you can do electricity and heating on a geothermal project. It doesn't have to be just one, but yeah, like it all sort of depends on like who you're giving the energy or electricity or heating to, and what they want or what their needs are.
That's a fantastic answer. My next question from the Q&A is, can you talk about how geothermal can be used as energy storage? Can this become the next version of a strategic oil reserve? What are the barriers or opportunities here?
So in terms of energy storage, some new technologies like Eavor, we can actually scale, or basically control the flow of fluid within the loop that we have. And so when it's really sunny and when it's really windy, and solar and wind energy output is really high, we can slow down the loop and conserve heat within the ground. And then basically when it's not sunny and when it's not windy, say it's nighttime, and there's more demand for energy, scale up the loop so it goes quicker to meet the baseload demand. In terms of energy storage, like I don't know if you could just like you potentially could inject fluid down into a geothermal reservoir that has like, fractures or whatever, and then it gets hot, and then you produce it, which is what some places do. In the geysers in California, they do that. But in terms of energy storage, like it's more so like producing energy rather than energy storage, other than that first example I was talking about.
Cool. I like that you can slow the loop down. So that's pretty fun. I know that you talked about that you guys are looking at the deepest geothermal drill project to date. So what is the depth that you guys are looking at going?
So the well depth is based on a few different things. And so one of them is temperature. And so to be the deepest and like hottest directional well, or whatever that statement was, it has to go, you know, probably greater than, or what we're happy with anyways, is sort of like greater than 5 kilometers, maybe even, you know, pushing just past 7 in terms of depth. And so around the world, that would be the deepest geothermal well. And then in terms of temperatures, like, you know, if we're drilling past 5 kilometers and the temperature is like crazy unexpectedly high, in terms of turning this into like an economic project, does it make sense to drill deeper where potentially like it's never been done before and equipment can start failing with these like crazy temperatures? Or just if you have sufficient temperature for the project going forward, do you just stop? And so that's the kind of thing, it's hard to give like a certain like value or metric to it. So it's kind of like past 5 kilometers is the goal. And then, you know, with that, we'll have shown that, you know, we can drill fast in granite for long periods of time. And then within those temperature conditions, to push it beyond that, I don't know, like it's kind of above my like pay grade if people want to do that.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. And cool, thank you so much for your presentation and joining us today and taking the time. We really appreciate it. It was super informative and easy to digest. So yeah, we've really appreciated having you today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Super. Alrighty, enjoy the rest of your Thursday. And yeah, look forward to see what geothermal brings for the future.
See ya. Thanks.